Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here of the DailySheeple.com. This is your daily news update, and I want to start out with a little bit of news about Julian Assange. Of course, it was kind of put out today that, we kind of shelved this whole October surprise thing because of the danger to the Ecuadorian embassy. Yep, so there's a dud for you right there. That's no good. Well, also, I want to talk about this this Department of Justice. Apparently, the Obama administration's DOJ dropped charges against an alleged provider of Libyan weapons. This, according to Politico.com. And I find this very interesting because they don't want to prosecute due to the fact that, perhaps it might bring out some dirty laundry exposing Hillary Clinton and her effort to arm the anti-Gaddafi rebels there. And so Kenneth P. Vogel and Josh Gerstein of Politico.com is reporting that the Obama administration moved to dismiss charges against an arms dealer it had accused of selling weapons that were destined for Libyan rebels. Let's not forget, folks, that when all this went down, when the Libyan embassy, the U.S. embassy in Libya, was attacked, at the same time, the weapons caches of Gaddafi were raided and consequently taken and sent over to the Syrian rebels, the rebels over in Syria. I don't necessarily think it was used against Gaddafi's or Libyan forces. It was actually moved out, especially the chemical weapons. If you take a look at what happened over in Syria, especially early on, there was a lot of talk about the rebels using chemical weapons, and that probably came from Libya. But anyway, this says right here, it says, quote, they don't want this stuff to come out because it'll look really bad for Obama and Clinton just before the election. That's justice for you, isn't it, folks? That's right. Let's just drop the charges against this dealer, this weapons dealer, that went and sold weapons to anti-Gaddafi rebels. And so now the Obama administration's moving to dismiss the charges. I mean, this is how America works. This is how the corrupt nature of our political system works. And this is why I find it pointless to take part in the selection process every 4 years or, every 2 for the House of Representatives. It's pointless. Everybody in there's corrupt. And no one has the cojones to stand up against these individuals and do the right thing. And this is just another example of that. I also want to bring up the fact that there's a lot of crazy weather going on in the world today. And there is a couple of interesting pieces that are out there. First, by the LA Times, who's reporting that this unusual earthquake activity out in California, in Southern California, is really causing a lot of anxiety out there. And of course, we're referring to the earthquake swarms at the Salton Sea. And LA Times is reporting that a swarm of seismic activity at the Salton Sea that began a week ago prompted scientists to say that there was an elevated risk for a big San Andreas Fault earthquake. Of course, now we have the technology to be able to predict earthquakes before they happen in some way, shape, or form. And this is good. Also, if you take a look at, say, the YouTuber out there, Suspicious Observers, if you check out his work and his body of work on his YouTube channel, and he does a little 5-minute a piece every day. His name's Ben Davidson. And he does a great piece on how solar activity directly impacts not just the weather, but also earthquake activity. And he's even got very accurate as far as predicting where earthquakes are going to happen and when, just based on solar activity. So that's very interesting. But it says a swarm of seismic activity at the Salton Sea that began a week ago prompted scientists to say that there was an elevated risk for a big San Andreas Fault earthquake. By Tuesday, that risk had lessened, and the California governor's Office of Emergency Services said that the advisory period was over. But the impact of that warning was still being felt because many a tinfoil hatter out there is looking for the big one. And you know what? I would say it's probably a pretty good idea to prepare for a big one if you live over in California. So that's just something to do. A lot of people are bolting bookshelves to the walls and installing safety latches and on the kitchen cabinet, strapping down televisions. Probably a good idea if you're in an earthquake-prone area anyway. So just something to pay attention to there. And also over on the East Coast, we've got a hurricane that is bearing down on Florida right now. Actually, it's over in the Caribbean, but it'll be in Florida here soon. And it's going to go right up the coast, it looks like. And, here in North Kakalaki, we're under a state of emergency. So that has the very real possibility of causing some heartache and pain for myself, but also, for the states of Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina as well. They've all declared a state of emergency. And so residents now are raiding grocery stores in order to prepare for this kind of stuff. And what you come to find out, folks, is that there's a lot of people that just do this last minute. That's not something that you should do. Even if you think, it's only a 20% chance. Look, fill up the gas cans because you can always throw it in the car later. Have your water on hot standby and plenty of non-perishable food to be able to weather the storm. Because when instances like this arise, you don't want to be caught with your pants down. You just don't. So we are looking at a very, very, very interesting situation that's unfolding here on the East Coast. And depending on where and how it hits is going to be, it's going to really make or break as far as what kind of damage is done and what's going to happen, and it could vary. You're talking about right now over in the Caribbean, it has 140 mile an hour winds. You have to also understand that the East Coast has been inundated with rain here over the past month, and everything is soaking wet. The ground is soft. So if you get high winds over an extended period of time, you're going to have power lines go down. See, down south, you don't have many houses with basements. Power lines are typically above ground because of the high water table. So this could have a devastating impact if it makes landfall anywhere on the East Coast. So hopefully it stays out to sea. Stay tuned for that. Also on the dailysheeple.com, our own Melissa Dykes writes that Facebook's now censoring and even deleting private messages about Hillary's drone threat message to Assange. Let me tell you something. That's really unbelievable that Facebook and their algorithm is going to go to that extreme about this, especially considering the fact that it's Hillary and she's threatening to kill somebody. What a surprise, So Melissa writes, in case you weren't aware, Facebook isn't just censoring your wall posts. Facebook is censoring private messages that can only be seen by people involved in the conversation. And more specifically, Facebook censored this private message, which just include 2 links to a story about Hillary. And she cites her private message. And it's just unbelievable. And basically, it documents Hillary referred to Julian Assange as a soft target and reportedly asked, hey, can we just drone this guy? This is back when she was Secretary of State. So when she actually had some power and clout to do it, and that's not to say that she couldn't right now, Obviously, it wasn't her basement dwellers comment that got Facebook's AI goat, as Melissa writes, and absolutely right. So you can just see what kind of effort is involved here and just how all of these large social media platforms are in lockstep with the powers that shouldn't be. Unbelievable. SHTFplan.com has a great piece. They mirrored Zero Hedge's Tyler Durden, who says that Russia conducts a nuclear drill with 40 million as the U.S. pushes for war in Syria. Mind you, while we are doing nothing, and I mean nothing in the United States, to guard our infrastructure against EMP, and let me just say this. Our electric grid is extremely vulnerable to EMP. Now, the smartphones that you have, I want to say for the most part, are hardened against EMP, but our electric grid is not. And what's sad about the whole thing is it would cost about $2 billion to harden our electric grid against EMP. $2 billion. How much have we paid in foreign wars? Just since 2001, let alone anything before that. How much have we paid to fund the police state in this country, and we can't afford $2 billion to harden our electrical grid against EMP or perhaps a solar flare or anything like that, does that not speak volumes to the powers that shouldn't be in their plan to turn the lights out maybe at some point in time? I think it does. But anyway, the editor's comment here on shtfplan.com says, pure insanity. The powers that be are now flirting with the option of an all-out war and potentially unprecedented levels of destruction. The American public has never been presented with any cohesive, rational, or good reason at all for why we're still embroiled in the Middle East, and one can only assume that there are other hidden agendas at work. Now, the rivalry to supply Europe with energy and a proposed pipeline from the Arabian Peninsula through Syria and Turkey into Europe may be a much better explanation for why we're being dragged so perilously close to war than anything else we've been told. It certainly appears that the West intends to allow radical Islam to take hold of the region amid a vacuum of power, and the U.S. would prefer to partner with terrorism than lose its grip on the existing world order. Absolutely right. You know, I got to wonder, as we go up into this election, if we're not going to see a pickup of activity, because they don't want somebody that's not a globalist in office. And believe me, I'm in no way, shape, or form endorsing Trump, because Trump has his own personal agenda. Whether it be just a check in the box as far as his legacy is concerned, I don't know. All I can say is they do not like the populist sentiment that is running rampant in Western society. And so they're pulling out all the stops. I can tell you that it wouldn't surprise me at all if we had a false flag attack or something of that nature to provoke a response and thus go ahead and, perhaps enter into a war or even, continue or accelerate this proxy war that we have going on in Syria. It's very interesting. By the way, over in Russia, they have built more nuclear shelters here in the last 5 or 10 years, enough to fit most of the population of Moscow and their major cities in these shelters. Over here in the United States, there's been no infrastructure planning at all for anything like that. So just food for thought as we continue going down this road here. And by the way, or this could just be retaliation for the fact that, according to the Telegraph, U.S. diplomats were given date rape drugs by Russian officials. Isn't that interesting? So apparently, the Russians are kind of getting PO'd that there's stuff going on. So, hey, let's just slip them a Mickey in their drinks. Yeah. God only knows what else happened to them after the fact. 2 junior U.S. officials, according to Nick Allen of the Telegraph, one male and one female, were believed to have been targeted separately while attending the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in St. Petersburg in November. The allegations were first reported by Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which was briefed by a U.S. government official. Yeah, good propaganda there. It says one of the diplomats was incapacitated and taken to a clinic for treatment, but U.S. officials believed that there was an attempt to cover up the incident. They tried to get blood tests done to determine the precise drug that had been used, but the electricity went out at the clinic, so samples couldn't be taken. Because you can't draw blood without electricity, right, folks? That's right. Yeah. Now, the victim was then flown out of the country to another hospital, but at that time, it was too late to obtain a sample. How convenient. So they just go ahead and blame Russia for slipping a Mickey in these diplomats' drinks. And I just find that very interesting as well. I mean, this whole hoopla with Russia, it just seems to me that Russia does not want any part in this. And all they want to do is protect the sovereignty of their ally, which is being threatened by the West. And it's really that simple. Look at what's happened in Iraq. Look at what's happened in Afghanistan. Look at what's happened in Libya and all of the other places where we have intervened. You have to ask yourself, are they better off than they were when we went in there? Was the Middle East more or less stable with Saddam Hussein? Ask yourself that very question, because as it stands, according to Mike Krieger of LibertyBlitzkrieg.com, he's saying that U.S. troops are going to be deployed to Iraq and may face violent resistance from Iraqi state militias. Look at This is what happens when you try to force your will on people that don't want you there. And I want to make this point clear because this is very, very important. What's going on overseas can very well happen here, and they know this. That's why they were videotaping license plates at gun shows. You know, they're having local police do that. Oh, let's go and get everybody's license plates so we know who's buying guns, what, where, why, and how. You know, not the fact that you got to do a background check anyway doesn't really matter, right? They just want to get your license plate just to seal the deal. But I guess what we're doing now is the United States, according to Reuters, is sending around 600 new troops to Iraq to assist local forces in the battle to retake Mosul from the Islamic State. And that's expected to go on later this year. This new development is the third such boost in troop levels in Iraq since April, underscoring the difficulties President Obama has had extracting the U.S. military from the country. How's that so difficult? Okay, boys, it's time to come home. Done. Don't really see the problem there. And they could face resistance. Oh, really? What would happen if UN Blue Hats came in and tried to force their will upon you? What if here in the United States, the country of China decided to come and tell us how to live? How do you think people would respond? How do you think people would act if China came and told us how to live, and told us what to do, and tried to steal our resources? What then? Do you think people would be pissed? Do you think they would fight back? Food for thought there, folks. The Fed chair, Janet Yellen, apparently has a plan B, according to activist posts, as they want to intervene directly in the stock market. Isn't that interesting? This by Stefan Gleason. He says October could see a ramping up of volatility across all asset markets. The month is notorious on Wall Street for the 1987 stock market crash, and the fall crashes also occurred in 2000 and 2002 and 2008. So are we due for another crash? Perhaps. Some analysts think it will come after the election. Others think the stock market will stay elevated until the Federal Reserve raise rates. I can tell you this, folks, we're definitely in a bubble. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you take a look at how people are, how their wages are stagnant, how costs have certainly not gone low. Again, you know, we've seen a decrease in energy costs, but that's only because demand just doesn't, there's no demand for it. And now you've got the Fed that thinks that they're going to go and respond to any downturn by buying corporate stock, corporate bonds, and other non-traditional assets. Quote, it could be useful to be able to intervene directly in assets where the prices have a more direct link to spending decisions. That's according to Janet Yellen. So as if the game isn't rigged enough, now they're going to get in and keep the stock market propped up because they know what's going to happen in the long term or even in the short term once they're forced to raise rates. And so you just have to ask yourself, you know, just how legitimate is this? And are we ever going to see a crash again? Because I really don't think we will. Everything out there is fiat. Everything's fiat. They are manipulating everything. And, you know, me personally, I just don't have, from a moral standpoint and a standpoint of honor, I just can't participate in such thievery, in such just darkness. That's basically what it is. Finally, our last story of this evening. You know, if you're watching this, I would not recommend watching the recap of the vice presidential debate. Why? It's probably going to be the biggest snoozer of your life. You're talking about Tim Kaine, former governor of Virginia, U.S. Senator right now, and Indiana Governor Mike Pence. I mean, you want to talk about a snoozer and a half. Absolutely pointless. The only thing I can say is you want to talk about, you know, some people that, at least for Trump, Mike Pence, I think, is a handler. You want to hear what the handler's saying? Then go ahead and watch the recap of it. Tim Kaine, he was a crappy governor. He's a crappy senator. And he's on the Clinton bandwagon. That's all I have to say. Unbelievable, folks. But make sure you stay tuned and watch the Daily Update. Subscribe to the Daily Sheeple on YouTube. And check us out, thedailysheeple.com, folks. Have a great evening, and I will see you tomorrow.